Welcome to the deep dive. We often treat the alphabet we use as just, simple infrastructure, right?
Hmm.
Just a set of symbols for getting things done.
That's how it seems on the surface.
Yeah, but time again, you look across different cultures, different times, and the decision to adopt an alphabet or change one or even reject one, it's almost never just administrative. It gets intensely political, cultural, really tied up in identity.
Absolutely. It becomes a symbol itself.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into what our sources are calling the unending story, alphabet debates. It's a really deep look into the history of script choice in Turkey.
And it's the perfect way to frame it because the story, it goes back thousands of years. It's incredibly deep.
So what are we using to guide us through this?
We're leaning heavily on a really comprehensive 2014 scholarly report. It's called Bitmeyen Öykü, Alfabe Tartışmaları, The Unending Story, Alphabet Debates by Professor Nurettin Demir and Professor Emin Yilmaz. And they do a fantastic job. They track the whole history of Turkish writing systems. They cover that huge 1928 reform. And importantly, they get right into the fierce controversies that are still happening today, often about just three specific letters.
Right. So our goal here is to first get a quick handle on the why. Why did Turkey make that famous switch to the Latin script? What was the historical driver?
Mm-hmm.
And then really connect that history to what's happening now. We want to show you why just a handful of letters, Q, X, and W, can still spark such intense national debate today. It really bridges history, language policy, and current identity politics.
It's all connected.
Definitely. So let's start right at the beginning. Before the big switch in the 20th century, Turkish had this incredibly rich kind of multi-alphabet past, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just one script for centuries. They borrowed and adapted systems from pretty much every major civilization they came into contact with.
It really shows how adaptive the language or maybe the speakers were.
It really does. Our sources point out that the earliest traces we have of Turkish, recorded by other people, actually used Chinese script. That's way back in the 4th century.
Wow.
And then you see Greek script popping up in the 2nd century. But the first script we know the Turks used for themselves, that was the Orkhon runes, around the 8th century.
The Orkhon runes. That sounds ancient.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful cultural marker, right? Using your own script.
Hugely important. But even that was just a step along the way. It wasn't the final destination.
And after the runes.
Well, then came the Uyghur script, which itself was derived from Sogdian. And that one had real staying power, used for centuries. Actually, it was even used sometimes in the Ottoman palace as late as the 17th century.
No kidding. So multiple scripts coexisting for a long time.
In different contexts, yes. But the real heavyweight, the script that dominated for a millennium and really defined written Turkish,
Right.
that was the Arabic script.
Okay, so Arabic script comes in around the 10th century.
Yeah.
Tied to Islam.
Yes, adopted pretty much hand in hand with the adoption of Islam. And it became this incredibly important connector, culturally, politically.
How so?
It linked the Eastern Turkic groups, what linguists call Sasateka, and the Western groups, the Osmanluca, or Ottoman Turkish speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Across huge distances for 1,000 years, this was the shared written standard.
That sounds like a major benefit, for cultural cohesion, political unity.
From that perspective, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And there's always a but, isn't there? When you look at it just linguistically, how well did it actually work for the Turkish language?
Well, that's where the problems start. Big problems. You could almost call it a linguistic crisis simmering for centuries.
Why? What was the mismatch?
The fundamental issue is that the Arabic script was designed for Semitic languages, like Arabic itself. Turkish is completely different. It's an agglutinative language, part of the Turkic family, and it has, crucially, 8 distinct vowels. The Arabic script just wasn't built for that.
So the Ottoman writing system wasn't purely phonetic?
Not really. It was kind of a hybrid, a mix of syllabic and phonetic writing, and it just couldn't properly represent many of the core sounds, the phonemes of Turkish.
And the big famous example is always the vowels.
That's the most glaring issue, yes. Vowel inconsistency was, massive. Take the Arabic letter vav, for instance.
Okay.
In Turkish, written with the Arabic script, that single character had to do the work for 5 different sounds.
5. Which ones?
The vowels O, U, U, and the consonant V.
Wow. So if you just saw that letter vav in a word, you couldn't actually know how to pronounce it without knowing the word already.
Exactly. You needed context. A lot of context. The letters themselves weren't enough. It fundamentally broke that simple idea, one sound equals one letter.
So how badly did it fail that principle? Do we have numbers on that?
We do. The report we're using cites a really striking comparison. It looked at how often the Arabic script actually achieved that sound equals letter ideal for Turkish, the
Wow.
result. Just 21.14% of the time.
Only 21%. That's incredibly low.
It's incredibly low.
Wow.
Now, contrast that with the Latin-based script that was eventually adopted, that script. It realized the same principle 95.33% of the time.
Okay, 21 versus 95%. That's not just a small difference. That's a chasm.
It's a massive gap, and it had real consequences. It meant literacy was much harder to achieve, and the written language often remained the domain of a small, educated elite.
It sounds like this constant tension was building between maybe the cultural prestige of using the Arabic script, the script of empire, of religion, and the practical need for a script that actually fit the language, made it easy to read and write.
That's a perfect summary of the tension. Prestige versus efficiency.
But before the big revolutionary change in 1928, people did try to fix the Arabic system, right? It wasn't like nobody noticed the problem.
Oh, absolutely. There are attempts. The most famous one happened during World War I back in 1914. It was led by Enver Pasha, a major figure at the time.
Right.
He introduced something called the Hatnasidit, the new line. Sometimes it was called the Ordu Elifbasi, the army alphabet.
What did he try to do?
He basically tried to force the Arabic script to be more phonetic for Turkish. He separated the letters. Normally they're connected in Arabic script, and he insisted on adding explicit marks for the vowels.
So trying to make it less ambiguous, deligature it, add vowels, sounds logical. Why didn't that take off?
Well, a few reasons. It was wartime, which made implementing a massive change like that incredibly difficult. Logistics, training, printing.
Sure.
But fundamentally, it also showed that the problems were just too deep. You couldn't just tinker around the edges of the Arabic script. It needed more than tweaks. That failure, in a way, really highlighted the need for a more radical solution.
Which brings us to 1928, the big one. Kanun 1353, the law adopting the new Turkish alphabet. And our sources really stress this point. This wasn't just about fixing the linguistic problems Enver Pasha failed to solve.
No, not at all. While the linguistic benefits were huge, the primary drivers were political and cultural.
A statement.
A massive statement. It was a core pillar of Ataturk's modernization project for the new Turkish Republic. It was designed as a very deliberate, very rapid, and very total break from the Ottoman past, the Islamic cultural sphere, the Arabic script's legacy.
So adopting a Latin-based alphabet was signaling, what, alignment with the West?
Exactly. Alignment with Western political and cultural norms, modernity, secularism. And crucially, the new script was based directly on the spoken Turkish of Istanbul.
Ah, so it closed that gap we talked about?
Yeah.
Between speech and writing?
Instantly, or, well, very quickly. It aimed to make the written language accessible to everyone, not just the elite. It was conceived as a revolution in mass literacy.
Okay, so that sounds like a huge success story. Solved the linguistic problem, boosted literacy, made a major political statement. You'd think the alphabet debates would end there, right?
You would think so, but
Yeah.
the story is called the unending story for a reason. The arguments didn't stop, they just shifted.
Okay, so let's make that transition. We're moving into the modern era now. What are the debates about today? If the 1928 alphabet works so well, what's left to argue about?
Well, the focus shifts. It moves from mass literacy to finer linguistic points, debates about perfection, and very significantly, it gets tangled up with external pressures from globalization and internal political issues.
Okay, start with the linguistic side. Even this near-perfect phonetic script has critics.
Minor ones, yes, among linguists mainly. They point out small shortcomings. For instance, Standard Turkish has a subtle sound called the closed E. It's slightly different from the regular E. You hear it in words like vermek, to give. If you listen closely, vermek, it's a bit tighter.
Okay, subtle.
Very subtle. The standard alphabet doesn't have a separate letter for it. There's also debate about the nasal N sound written as ni, which exists in some dialects and historical forms, like banya, to me, but isn't in the standard 29 letters.
These sound like quite technical points, though. Not exactly headline news.
True. A more common point of friction, something even regular users notice, is the circumflex mark. The little hat symbol, the düzeltme işareti.
Oh, yes, the shapka. That causes problems.
It does because it's overloaded. It's trying to do 3 different jobs at once, which kind of goes against that original one symbol, one sound idea.
What are the 3 jobs?
First, it marks long vowels. This changes meaning. Think car snow versus car profit. Same letters, different vowel length, different meaning, marked by the hat.
Got it. Length. What else?
Second, it shows that the consonant before the vowel is palatalized, meaning you pronounce it slightly differently, sort of softer, further up in the mouth, like in lale, tulip. That ul isn't the same as a standard ul.
Okay, palatalization. And the third?
The third is something linguists call the niste isi. It's an Arabic-Persian grammatical feature used in loan words to show relation or belonging, like in milli, meaning national, related to the nation, millet.
So vowel length, consonant softening, and grammatical marker, all using the same little hab.
Exactly. It's not very efficient, and it can be confusing, even for native speakers sometimes. It's a deviation from the 1928 ideal.
Okay, so there are these internal linguistic debates. But you mentioned external pressures, too. This is where things get really interesting, right? Because history starts repeating itself.
Precisely. Remember that tension. Efficiency versus prestige.
Right. In Ottoman times, prestige meant Arabic and Persian. So people wrote loanwords the fancy Arabic way, even if it didn't match Turkish sounds.
Correct. They wanted to show sophistication by using the original spelling.
So what's the prestige language now?
Globally, it's English. Unquestionably.
And that's driving demand for letters not in the standard Turkish alphabet.
That's a major factor behind the Q, X, and W issue. It's not the only factor, but it's significant. Today, you see many people, especially in advertising, branding, technology, they prefer to write English loanwords exactly as they appear in English.
Like taxi instead of the perfectly phonetic Turkish taxi.
Exactly. Or show instead of shov.
Right.
Or bypass instead of bypass. Even though Turkish has perfectly good ways to write these sounds with its own alphabet.
So it's the same dynamic, using the foreign spelling to signal.
Yeah.
Modernity, global connection, sophistication.
All of the above. It's precisely parallel to the Ottoman era habit, just with English replacing Arabic and Persian as the source of prestige.
That is fascinating, seeing that pattern repeat. But, okay, let's be clear. The real political heat around Q, X, and W, it's not just about spelling taxi correctly, is it?
No, not at all. That's more of a cultural trend. The intense political debate comes from a different place entirely. Domestic language rights, specifically the needs of the Kurdish language spoken by millions within Turkey.
Because Kurdish needs those letters.
Yes. To accurately write Kurdish phonemes, the distinct sounds of the language Q, X, and W are necessary. They represent sounds that don't exist in standard Turkish.
So the controversy wasn't that the Turkish alphabet was bad for Turkish, but that the law establishing it got used in a certain way?
Exactly. The 1928 law, Kanun 1353, technically only regulated the writing of the Turkish language. But for decades, the interpretation by authorities was much broader and, frankly, quite rigid.
How so?
It was interpreted to effectively prohibit the use of Q, X, and W in any official capacity, even if it wasn't Turkish being written. So, trying to register a child's Kurdish name containing a W, or using a historical place name with a Q, that could be legally blocked or even penalized.
So it became less about linguistic rules for Turkish and more about defining what was acceptable within the state, a political tool.
It absolutely became a political tool. It was used to reinforce a specific definition of national identity and linguistic unity. Blocking those letters became symbolic of defending the republic's official linguistic landscape.
So the sources suggest that this wasn't just bureaucratic stubbornness, but tied to a deeper sense of protecting national unity, defined very strictly around the Turkish language and its official script.
That's the context, yes. The unwavering adherence to only the 29 official letters was seen by many as crucial for maintaining that unity established in the Republic's founding era. Introducing other letters, even for non-Turkish languages used within Turkey, was often perceived as a threat, a potential crack in that unity.
Okay, so then fast forward. Things did eventually change politically. What happened with that 2014 Democratic opening package? That was a big deal, right?
It was highly significant, yes. One key part of that package aimed specifically at this issue. It essentially removed the legal penalties, the sanctions, for using letters like Q, X, and W.
There was that popular phrase at the time?
Klaviylere özgürlük, freedom for keyboards. That really captured the feeling. It was a major step because it signaled a shift from the state. A recognition that citizens shouldn't be punished for using these characters, particularly in personal or non-official contexts.
But, and this seems crucial, it didn't actually add Q, X, and W to the official Turkish alphabet, did it?
Absolutely not. That's a critical distinction. The official Turkish alphabet still has only 29 letters. What the 2014 change did was lift the legal prohibition on using those other letters in other contexts, particularly for writing other languages like Kurdish.
So the report's conclusion on this is quite clear then.
Unambiguous. The core issue isn't really a flaw in the Latin alphabet system itself for writing Turkish. It's excellent. The problem lies in the decades of political decisions about the status, the function, and the limitations imposed on non-Turkish languages spoken within the country's borders. It's politics, not phonetics, at the heart of that debate.
Okay, let's widen the lens now. Pull back from domestic Turkish politics and look at the bigger neighborhood. After the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, there was this huge wave of, well, nations rediscovering themselves, right? And the alphabet was often part of that.
Yes, a massive part. Across the former Soviet republics with Turkic-speaking populations, there was a huge push for cultural independence, and switching away from the imposed Cyrillic script was often step one.
And this led to an idea, a bigger idea.
It did. In the early 1990s, the dream of a common Turkic alphabet really took hold. The goal was ambitious. Create a single, standardized Latin script that could be used across the entire Turkic world. Imagine a unified writing system from Turkey all the way through Central Asia.
A pan-Turkic communication tool. Wow. Did they actually design one?
They did. There were conferences, collaborations, and they actually proposed a model, a 34-letter alphabet.
34 letters. So it included extra characters needed for sounds across different Turkic languages?
Exactly. It included things like the with an umlaut, the N with a tilde, and crucially, for our earlier discussion, it also included Q, X, and W. It was designed to be comprehensive, a really ambitious cultural and, let's be honest, political project.
That sounds amazing on paper. A shared script, boosting connection. But it didn't quite happen that way, did it? And that dream sort of stalled.
It mostly stalled, yes. It ran into the hard wall of reality, a combination of political factors, the economic constraints, and just practical difficulties.
What kind of difficulty?
Well, first, while some newly independent countries like Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan did officially adopt Latin scripts, they often went their own way, implementing slightly different versions tailored to their specific needs or political choices. There wasn't full standardization.
Okay, so national priorities trumped the pan-Turkic ideal sometimes.
Often. And then you had other major Turkic-speaking republics like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. They faced different pressures.
Such as?
Well, for one, significant Russian influence remained, both politically and culturally. Plus, strong economic ties to Russia made sticking with Cyrillic or delaying a switch seem more practical for many.
And the cost. Surely changing an entire country's writing system is expensive.
Hugely expensive. Think about it. Retraining every teacher, replacing every road sign, every official document, reprinting literally millions of books. It's a massive undertaking.
And there's probably inertia, too. People are used to Cyrillic after decades.
Massive cultural inertia. You had 50, 60, 70 years under Soviet rule where Cyrillic was the standard. An enormous amount of literature, science, history, academic work, everything was published in Cyrillic. Switching scripts instantly makes all of that harder for the current generation to access. It creates a kind of cultural break.
So the immediate practical needs cost, existing resources, political ties, often just outweighed that grand vision of a common alphabet.
In many cases, yes, the dream was powerful, but the practicalities were complex.
Okay, so reflecting on this whole journey, this unending story, from Orkhan runes through the 1,000 years of Arabic script and its problems, the big 1928 switch, and now these modern debates over Q, X, and W. What's the big takeaway? What does it tell us about alphabets and language?
I think the clearest takeaway is that an alphabet is never, ever just a neutral technical tool. It can't be.
It's always loaded with something else.
Always. It's loaded with history. It signals political allegiance, consciously or unconsciously. It carries immense cultural status. These modern arguments about Q, X, and W, they're really just the latest echo of centuries-old debates. That same tension, balancing linguistic efficiency, what works best for the sounds of the language, against external cultural influence and prestige, whether that prestige comes from classical Arabic or modern global English.
That tension seems absolutely core to the whole story. It just keeps reappearing in different forms. But looking forward, connecting this history to, well, the world you live in now, especially the digital world, what's the next pressure point likely to be?
That's the really interesting question the report kind of leaves us with. It notes that historically big alphabet changes often happen alongside major societal shifts, a change in religion, a political revolution, or a technological leap.
We've seen the religious and political drivers clearly in this story.
Exactly. But what about technology? If global English continues its dominance, not just in culture, but specifically in science, technology, the internet, coding, basically the infrastructure of modern life, does that create a new kind of pressure?
How so?
Well, it raises a question for you to think about. Could future pressures on the Turkish alphabet come less from internal political demands about representing non-Turkish languages and more from a purely pragmatic need? A need for the Turkish script to easily, seamlessly integrate all the characters and maybe even the spelling norms required by the dominant global digital language.
So the technology itself, the internet, software, global platforms, might end up forcing changes that politics couldn't.
It's a possibility. The next chapter in the unending story might be driven less by policy debates and more by the simple, practical need to function smoothly in a digitally interconnected world heavily shaped by English orthography. That's something to keep an eye on.